Good morning, folks, on this chilly Friday. It's just been out and it definitely is cold. So, wrap up. Today, we have an interesting talk given by our friend Richard Drake, and who has titled it After Prison Care. Richard.
Okay. I didn't title it that. My script says support for a former prisoner, but it doesn't matter because it's all connected. I've told David that I want to do a preamble before we start recording, but we've started recording and he says he can clip this off if necessary. I'm aware that some people on this call will know a bit more about the subject than I want to talk about. And in particular, they may know more about the individual around whom my discussion is based. And I want to maintain that individual's confidentiality. So throughout the talk, I'm going to avoid mentioning names and any other specific identifying details about the individual and their background as far as it's practical, so that we can record it and publish the recording. And I'd like anyone else who is in the position of knowing a bit more than everyone else, to maintain that confidentiality too. And it'll become obvious why. And if when we get to the discussions at the end, I feel that this sort of circumspect approach is hindering people's curiosity, I may ask for recording to be stopped, so that we're not constrained too much. But I am going to be quite circumspect on a number of things. And if at the end it just has proved impossible to have this talk and discussion without broaching the confidentiality, then I'm going to ask the recording isn't published. So I hope that makes sense as well. So I don't want to be too secretive, but it is a sensitive subject. So I'm going to read from a script in order that I don't inadvertently break my own guidelines. And bear with, because I've got quite a bad cough at the moment, and I hope it's not going to interfere too much. But if I go into a coughing fit, I'll take my audio off and do it silently. So I've called this support for a former prisoner, but it covers a lot of things. In the March area meeting newsletter, I inserted a brief article which resulted in Patsy asking me to do this talk. And some of you may not have seen the article, so I'm going to read it so you get a bit of the context. Great. And the article went, "Some may recall my request over a year ago for friends to join a support group for someone shortly to be released from prison. I'm pleased to report that there was a very useful response, and we have been meeting with that person on a regular fortnightly basis since their release in January 2025. And during 2026, we've also managed to arrange for private meetings for worship on a monthly basis. The challenges of supporting someone who is released from prison at the end of their sentence, as opposed to parole with support and conditions, are clear to all in the support group. It's also clear that someone in this situation with very limited personal support networks dearly values the limited support we provide. We will always welcome more to the support group, especially men. Please contact me if you think you may be interested in joining us. Thanks." Well, that was the article, and my request still stands. No one did come forward, but there we go. You can spread the word. There is still need for people to join the support group, please. So I'm going to talk briefly on how the request for support came about, what support we're actually providing, and finish with some of the issues that I think the whole situation raises. So the request for support. We received an initial request to support someone known to a Quaker prison chaplain in February 2022, with the note, "One of the prisoners who I see weekly and attended the meeting for worship before the pandemic has their parole hearing later this year." And I got some details of their background and the strong indication that they would be released into hostel accommodation in Bristol. It was suggested that, quote, probably the easiest and most appropriate steps in the first instance would be to set up a befriending group to meet with them regularly. This would help their reintegration into the local area, etc. Well, we were ready with a support group at that time, but the individual wasn't released on parole as expected. Some time passed and the initial support group weren't called into play. And then in September 2024, we were informed of another parole hearing in November, and I established another potential support group in readiness. However, that parole hearing was also unsuccessful. But we were told the person concerned would be released at the end of their sentence in January 2025. End of sentence means that there are no conditions for release beyond check-in with the police liaison, no ongoing probation support, and therefore no risk factors for recall to prison beyond reoffending. And at that point, I'm just going to show you this. This is something published, very useful guidance by the Quakers in Criminal Justice Group. You may have seen this, which talks about ways to welcome former prisoners into your meetings. And the assumption throughout this is that high-risk prisoners who are released into the community, who we might be supporting, have conditions of release.
A dialogue with meetings.
And that useful guidance doesn't cover the situation we have where someone is released at the end of their sentence with no conditions other than the need to report their whereabouts to the police on regular occasions. So in the lead up to that release, I had several online meetings with police and probation contacts, the Bristol Quakers safeguarding team, and of course the support group, to be sure we were ready to spring into action with the safeguards in place. So, delivering support. The support we'd promised was always planned to be low-key, a friendly chat over tea, coffee every week or two, and a gradual welcome into meeting for worship. If the person had been released on parole and therefore subject to recall, there would have been clear conditions of release, which we would be made aware of and be able to work within. As the individual was released at the end of their sentence, none of those conditions were in place and probation were not involved from that date onwards. To add to the difficulty, the end of sentence date fell on a weekend and they were released on a Friday with no accommodation sorted. They spent 2 nights sleeping rough, 1 night, maybe 2 nights, in fact, in A&E before then getting housed after about a week of being released. They spent a lot of time in Bristol bus station. Support at that stage was limited to advising them where homeless support services could be found, and contact was by phone only. On a burner phone, I've got a dual SIM phone with an extra number in it, and that is our means of communication with this individual through me and a separate phone number. After that fairly fraught initial period, we've now settled into regular fortnightly meetings on a Thursday or Friday morning where 4 or 5 of us share tea or coffee in a public place and get to know each other's interests. We've also eventually found a way to support the individual into monthly meetings for worship at a time that suits. And at the April meeting, the one just gone last Tuesday, we invited the prison chaplain who set the whole process going. So the meeting for worship we had last Tuesday included the former prison chaplain and since they've now retired, the current prison chaplain who this individual knows from the past. It's very clear to me that the support we give to this individual due to their personal circumstances is of immense value to them. They're isolated from their family. Their family is in another country that they cannot get to. They have very few and distant close personal friends and have limited scope for what we would consider normal social connections. although each member of the support group has a different ability and capacity to give their time, we've all remained engaged with the process and have received interesting insights into various aspects of the prison system. And more members are always welcome, of course. So, issues raised. I've in my little script it says where to start ? There are a lot of issues here. But here's some. So it's probably become clear to you by the way I've spoken already that this individual has challenging characteristics that mean we have to regard them as a safeguarding risk that prevents them being fully included in our normal meetings for worship and other activities. So some of the issues raised are, what's the role of prison chaplains in managing the expectations for Quaker support? You know, this person had an expectation. What if we had not been able to bring together a support group? Is parole with conditions actually less of a risk than end of sentence release with none? And what does it mean if someone has failed to get parole after 2 attempts, which must mean that they thought there was a risk there and then is released at the end of sentence with no conditions? What if this person hadn't been introduced to us in this way? What would we know? If we hadn't had the contact with the Quaker prison chaplain, hadn't been asked to do this, and they'd simply been released at the end of their sentence and turned up to a Quaker meeting. How can we sustain the support we're currently giving in the long term? There are few of us. There are 9 people in the support group, totally dependent on me being the liaison, a single point of contact. This is, how sustainable is that? And what do we do when that kind of support is not sustainable? So those are the questions I want to leave you with. Everything's working at the moment, everything's fine, and there are no problems. But I want to, it raises issues that I think people should be interested in and concerned about. Deep issues, practical ones, and ones of Quaker values. Can we truly be welcoming to all people? Is it beyond our capacity to be a truly welcoming community? How far does our desire to see that of God in others and work on that basis get constrained and limited by really practical issues of safeguarding concerns and beyond that, people's fear of what they don't know and understand? So that's my talking bit over, friends.
This subject came up to me quite a few years ago when I was having a reunion with a few friends from where I used to work, which was in a couple of schools for severely disturbed children. And some of these children had not done too well as others had. And there was not the support for them when they came out, and so when they had gone to other communities, the reaction of those communities was pretty negative, and they at least one of them had wandered off and been known to the police, and the police informed the community where they lived that that person was in the community. So, it was not a good thing. And so I think that what you're doing, Richard, is admirable, and it is needed because the person who is living out in the community with no support and no, I suppose the word is, checks upon their behaviour can only harm the communities that they live in. So it is quite a big question and quite a something to be challenged within, as you say, Quaker communities.
Manda, you were going to.
Hi, yes, I just was unclear at the beginning why the then prisoner just had some contact with the Quaker chaplain and identified that they were interested in Quakerism, Quaker worship, or had that been part of their lives before prison? I just wasn't
No,
sure.
it hadn't been part of their lives before prison. They found in the support they got from Quaker worship in prison very, very useful and helpful. And I would say that in many respects, the individual is not through and through Quaker. But I know a lot of friends in membership who I would say the same about. They're not someone whose commitment to Quakerism is really important in their lives. But they are someone who's found that coming to meetings for worship is something that they've found very helpful in dealing with their own internal demons and issues. And there are plenty of those. This is someone who's had a fairly difficult life in lots of respects, and part of that has been their offending, which is not to be brushed over. This is serious offence stuff. We're not talking minor shoplifting or this is the sort of thing that would worry people if they knew someone in their midst was capable or had been capable of that. And we've got no expertise in judging what the current risk is at all, except that we know that, as Ray was kind of saying, the less support people have, the more they feel rejected by society, the greater the chance of the past offending behaviour to reoccur. So we are part, a very small part, but we're part of that fairly fragile and loose support system that they have in place, and their connection with Quakers, which was built up during their time in prison, is very much a part of that. So to feel pushed aside by Quakers at the moment would be, I think, an additional trauma that they don't want, and would find it difficult to cope with.
Yeah, and sorry, another question, but then I'll stop. Just are there other support networks that they might be interested in or are available? I was thinking about if the person was Black and wanted to be with other Black people, if they were a younger person. I'm imagining our support group is quite elderly. Is there a role for us in seeing what else is out there, or is the person looking at that? Or
I think that sort of thing is the sort of thing we discuss in a very gentle way and tangential way in our social meetings. We talk about what they've been doing and what books they're reading and where they've been, and at the moment they have significant health issues. And as I mentioned, that they spent a couple of nights in A&E on release. They've got long-term issues with pancreas and gallstones, and health is not not great. And that's a priority for them, beyond all the other things they want to deal with as well. So health and housing have been an absolute priority. Long term, possibly they want to get into work, but they're not capable of that at the minute. Um, and that'll be a different challenge and a different set of supports and challenges to feel rejected by or get along with. But we're not in any way a circle of support and accountability or trying to be one. We have no plan here and agreement that you would have in that kind of support and accountability where you're checking behavior. We're just a social group saying, yeah, we're Quakers. You've been connected with Quakers. We're happy to meet you and be there for you to some degree, but it's very limited. And if it was less than as limited as if it, sorry, more than the limited support we could offer, I would have even greater difficulty getting people to join the support group. You don't need to be qualified to do this. You just need to be able to deal with someone who is not your normal Quaker by any means, in a friendly way, in a friendly, curious way. It really is to do with seeing the person and not the way they present or what their past represents. And we're not all up to that. We all have our own triggers and difficulties. Heather will tell you from being a prison chaplain that, there's a marked difference between the way that the people in the chaplaincy view the prisoners and the way many prison officers view the prisoners, and the system itself views the prisoners, and that sort of seeing the prisoner as a person with a humanity and dealing with that bit of them is what I'm picking up is what chaplaincy is all about, whereas other people don't necessarily see it that way.
Shall I say a word or two about from the
Please.
point of view of a chaplain? Because yes, this came quite recently. I mean, there is no doubt that for prisoners across the board, where on release, various faith communities can play a very important role in in acceptance, in the way they tend to believe or urge the belief that people can change, that they can be redeemed, that if you've done a wrong thing in your life, you're not just a wrong un for life. So that can be very, very important, and some people look for that, or indeed have been involved before they came in, and it's a major sort of source of support. So that's very important. But this whole business about safeguarding has really got so much bigger in recent years because of various, dreadful stories of abuse, within the church. And, we can't assume that because people are church-going people, that they're going to always behave very well. I was approached as a chaplain and as a member of the chaplaincy team by an organisation that produces the Welcome Directory. And this is a list of organisations and so on, and churches that will accept and welcome people who have been in prison into their services and so on. And they even phoned me up because they wanted very much Quakers to be part of this, and I never felt, I don't know, I rather put it to one side because there were certainly people, I've never been one to sort of see Quaker chaplaincy as sort of outreach, the more people who come to Quakers, the better. And we're not allowed in any case to preach or proselytize or anything in that way. We're there for everybody, whatever their religion or none, which I think is quite how it should be. But obviously people would ask about Quakerism, and I would tell them about it, and it was attractive to a lot of people, partly because of the meetings for worship, which allowed people to sort of just have a bit of peace and quiet and reflect, and also the idea that our beliefs are based on our experience. Nobody is sort of telling you what to do, and that business of coming to your own conclusions and everything appealed especially to young people who might have had less happy experiences of church going, and who assume that they're simply going to be judged by churches. So I guess I could have whipped a lot of people up into a kind of enthusiasm for joining Quaker meetings when they came out of prison. Well, so far so good, but then of course you have the safeguarding business. And I remember one young man in particular who had when he was quite young committed a sexual offence, that seems to be the one thing that people think somebody will never change. They found that very difficult to forgive, although it was hardly more than a youthful indiscretion, I think, when he was a teenager. And he was very keen on Quakerism and had worked very well in the prison towards rehab and turning over a new leaf. But when I went into it and talked about the kinds of relationship we'd have to have with the probation services, with the police, when he got released, and he would have had conditions under his release and so on. It was clear that he wouldn't be able ever to come along to a Quaker meeting. There were various things that might make that possible in terms of a support group, not only supporting him, but being there at the meeting with him. And it was just so fantastically complicated that, well, I mean, certainly I explained the difficulties to him. I thought it was sort of best to be honest about, as Richard said, his expectations of being kind of warmly welcomed without any problems. He may have to only come when there were no children there, for example, which causes a difficulty. So this business of, I suppose it's sort of end of the day, as they say, our desire to welcome people in, to provide that accepting, forgiving, and supporting environment for people coming out of prison, just clashes with the need for safeguarding. We have to remember, I remember we went through this briefly when I was at Bedminster, when somebody came along and was perfectly honest and talked about he in this case, I don't want any assumptions to be made about the particular person Richard's supporting, but there are certain things that make it very difficult to be accepted sort of anywhere really, and one of these is sort of sexual offences, and the meeting simply didn't feel, or there's certain individuals in the meeting felt particularly strongly about this and said that they didn't feel they could come to meeting if this person was there. So there isn't the universal acceptance that we might assume is there. And all of which is quite understandable, but it's just very tricky.
I think but with Heather talking there and thinking about other churches and the welcome thing, that there's something else that's quite unique about Quakers, which makes this harder for us. In other churches, you have a hierarchy.
Yeah.
You have a clear someone in charge.
Yes.
And a reporting line. Now, safeguarding works well when you have that. Safeguarding relies on that kind of control thing. Now, I am currently running this support group because I happened to be clerk of the meeting when these requests came through, and I couldn't see a way to pass this on to anybody else. That's as plain and simple. I would dearly love not to have been asked, because it hasn't been the easiest thing. But I was, and I'm there, and it's the right thing to do, and I don't feel any regret about doing it. But it's not something I can say I'm only doing because I was clerk, and it's therefore the current clerk's responsibility. It's not something that I can pass to a position in Quakers, because there is no position to pass it to. I mean, you could say it's elders, but that's we put people off being an elder or the clerk to elders, or if we said this, you've got to take this on as well. It's we just don't have that thing, which means that when we were looking at, and we did consider it at area meeting, for those who have any memory of it, we did consider in a couple of ways the welcome directory, and we kind of put it out which local meetings would want to feel part of this, and actually none of them could assemble and organize themselves in a way that said, well, as a meeting we want to, because we're a bit too loose. We don't have that structure.
No, you're quite right. Can I just add that I did talk about it in the chaplaincy, and I remember the Anglican chaplain and the Jehovah's Witness chaplain were quite airy about it. Oh yes, we have elders who can supervise, so there's no problem there. So yeah.
So it's a challenge. It's just and I'm just throwing out the questions. I mean, we're carrying on, and this is going okay for the moment, and it is interesting. I think if I were to think around the members of the support group and why they're there and what they're getting from it, we've got a real mix of people. Some kind of have always been. Oh, you're on twice, Heather. What are you doing?
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, sorry. I'll get out.
Are we okay? I don't know why you're on there twice, Heather. So
No,
Patsy or David, could you bounce the second Heather, the one without the visual?
Oh, yeah.
There are two Heathers.
I see that. Yeah. I don't know how to. I can do a mute.
Yeah, that'll do for the time being. Okay. I would say the motivations for, I can only give my opinion that there is a range of motivations for people on the support group, and they range from a sort of, absolute commitment that this is the right thing to do and a long-term association with this kind of thing to simple curiosity. And I think there are a couple that came along simply because I made some quite strong personal appeals in a couple of meetings. So, and a range of ability to commit. I mean, there are two or three people that I can almost depend on to be at the meetings, and others that I rarely see, and that's understandable because they all have different pressures on their lives. So it's not that you join the support group and you have to do this, you have to do that. It's really just being part of something that is supporting someone else. So being keen to be interested is quite useful. Marion, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. I just want to say two quite separate things if there's time. One is about one of your questions, which is how sustainable is this in the long term? I kind of think, supposing tomorrow another prisoner pops up, wanting the same support, could we do it? I don't think we could. Just to clarify, I'm one of the people that sometimes attends the meetings with the person mentioned. And also kind of, it kind of, is this forever? I mean, most organizations offering this kind of support usually have a kind of time limit. Most mentoring schemes they go for 6 months or a year or 2 years, or they're not usually indefinite. Just because it's so much of a commitment that you might not be able to sustain it, or occasionally the kind of match between the supporters and the person being supported isn't as fruitful as you might hope, or hundreds of reasons. And we don't, and that's maybe because we're a faith organization, and it would be wrong to have a limit, or it may be just that we haven't actually thought about it. But I do kind of thinking personally, I kind of think, gosh, sometimes I'm absolutely fine. I'm going, my diary is clear and so on. And sometimes I can't manage it, and think, oh dear. And sometimes I think, should I reassess this along with other things? So the kind of the capacity issue, I think, is quite a big one. Um, so and but the other thing I wanted to say, which I don't know how relevant this is, but it seems to me that people who have committed sex offences of whatever gravity are now treated by society as complete pariahs, can never be reformed, can never be trusted, and are to be banned from practically every form of normal society. I say this based on a Quaker that I know. Some people may know, but I don't think many people here would know this person. Now in their 80s, having committed an offence of not trivial, but not terrifically serious either, when they were in their 20s, went to prison for a year, was given 4 years for a first offence, which was challenged, and he actually spent longer than his eventual 1 year sentence. Had never offended in any other way before. And because he couldn't get a job, he devoted his life to voluntary work. At first, it wasn't too bad because he was able to join groups that sort of did outdoor things, and there were families with children. That didn't seem to be a problem. Um, but as he's got older, the conditions have got stricter and stricter without him doing anything further except lead a blameless life. And so when CRB changed to DBS, he was reassessed, and he was told he could no longer do voluntary work with. I think he was doing sleep-ins at a hostel for homeless men. Not everybody's choice of activity. I think he was very valued, and he was told he couldn't do that anymore. The only voluntary work he was allowed to do was to stuff envelopes or write notes in an office, which of course is not mostly why people do voluntary work. They want to meet people, especially if they're isolated. Um, and more recently, he was taken to task for being in a lift with a child, um, um, and has been banned by Quakers from attending any meetings with people under 25. Of course, you can't even tell who's under 25 anymore. Once young people reach a kind of maturity, you have no idea whether they're 18 or 24 or 30. And because in his former work, he was involved with young people, he finds this terribly hard and very punitive. And he's only allowed to go to sort of big occasions if he's got at least one minder, maybe two, with him. And I mean, the indignity of it all. And he says, it would have been better if I'd done a murder. I would be more accepted if I'd done a murder. And he often thinks about suicide, because he feels so rejected by the whole of society, including Quakers. Um, I just find it totally unjust.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I'm sure other people want to contribute on that, and that's great. But I kind of like to answer some of it, and answer your first bit first,
Yeah,
then talk about the second, and then come back to the first bit. But I am at risk here of getting into the territory that I don't want to get into. It's quite hard to talk around this without being specific, but I'll do my best. The capacity for supporting, it is open-ended. I said, that when I was clerk, I wish I hadn't been asked, because that would have been a lot easier. But because what goes through your mind, and I would have been able to say no if we hadn't found the support group, but I did everything I could to get a support group both times, and it's working. So I'm pleased that we've done that. But it is one of those things, when you rescue someone from drowning in a river, was it the Chinese or something, say you are now responsible for the rest of their lives. One act of kindness, you cannot shirk that responsibility, because now to stop trying to provide the support is in itself an act of rejection. And I don't want to be part of that rejection. So, but we do have a capacity issue, and I am concerned if someone else in a similar situation were to come to us, how we would manage that. So it's on my mind. I've got a whiteboard. You can't see it because it's there on my wall, and I've got lots of things that I'm doing now. And over there, I've got 2026 challenges and things to do. At the bottom of that is this person's name and long-term question mark. I don't know. I just hope that we continue. I think I don't think there'll be any difficulty maintaining the level of support we're currently providing. I think we're already quite naturally, for natural reasons, losing on the point of losing a couple of people from the support group, because they have other commitments. They can't do it for the reasons you were talking, Marion, and that will continue. Not everyone can stay forever. I think we'll be able to replace them. There are people I can approach individually, personally, and ask them to join, I'm sure. The bigger issue really is that it's dependent on me. It's single point of contact, and it's not a big load at the moment. It's not a huge load. I have the capacity, but it is a load, and if I weren't there, it would be difficult to hand on. And there's no one sort of on the edges saying, yeah, I'll do that. You go away for 6 months and I'll keep this running. There's no one there to do that. So that's the long-term issue on my mind. The forgiveness thing I find really difficult. It's I find it a real personal challenge of being a Quaker, because there are real issues here. I mean, I've spoken about it would seem easier if this person had come out on parole and we'd had these release conditions that gave us a nice clear set of boundaries, and wouldn't it have been great if they'd signed up to as we've discussed, Marion, in the past, they'd signed up to an approach that meant we could have a circle of support and accountability with nice clear ways of proceeding, and you're holding them to account. That would be lovely, but they haven't. And we're left with this issue that because this risk is there, which has not been alleviated, the fact that they've had 2 parole hearings and not got parole must, in terms of normal logic, mean that the parole board felt there was a risk that meant they weren't happy letting them out. So it just runs to the end of sentence that the risk hasn't changed. There's nothing. We've got nothing to go on. So the risk is there, and the guidelines. We've been right up to friend's house, and all the advice we get is this person should not be allowed to a public meeting for worship. because you've got no means of safeguarding it. And it's sad. It's interesting, though, and I don't know if you found this, Marion, that as we get to know this person socially, any sort of we start judging. We build a picture. We build a sense of that's totally unfounded on anything except our limited exposure to them for a couple of hours every fortnight. So no professional. Marion may have more professional perspective on this, but I've got no professional perspective on it at all. But you get familiar with someone, and the risk appears less. So the more we get to know the person, the less that. Now that may be a danger. It may be a danger. But I've mentioned that we had a meeting for worship on Tuesday with the Quaker chaplain that started this process. And after the meeting, he said, "Thanks for all the support you. Is there any way forward that you can see that this person can come to meeting for worship in the future at some point?" And I had to say, no, I can't see it. I can't see it yet. I hope, and I'll keep looking to see if I can see it, but I can't see it yet. Because the only way that I can see that it would be possible is if everyone knew about this person. If this person was happy that everyone they might meet in the Quaker community knew about their circumstances in the way that the support group does, knew about their background, knew what they were going through, knew them as a person, then they might find it possible to accept them. But it's such an exposure, it's such a risk to that individual, and the other part of it is that although generally people might want to, and I'm sure if we went to area meeting and had this, there'll be such a will to do it that you might say, yeah, that's fine, let's do this. There would then be some people in some meetings who would think, no, that person's there, I'm not coming. And that's real. I know it's real because we've seen it at Bedminster in the past. It's there are so many people that might be affected. It might stop people coming to meetings. We might find that whatever meeting they attend is becomes very non-homogeneous, whatever the word is, very monoculture, because there's only a certain kind of person that would want to go to it, and that's changes the nature of our meeting. So I can't see the way forward yet, but I think if we stick at it, we might. But at the moment, it's supporting one individual in the best way we can, because that's the right thing to do.
Amanda, you wanted to say something?
Right, can I just check whether anyone else has things they want to say or ask? Because I've already talked once. Not missing anyone. Or Patsy.
Yeah.
Sorry, back to Richard.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if we didn't have any information at all about this ex-prisoner, if, because of his interest in being a Quaker, led him simply to wander into, for example, Central Meeting House one Sunday and sit down quietly and simply say anything about himself that he wanted to say and nothing more, what would be our position then? Does that make a difference?
Well, let me that would be interesting. I've thought about that, and I raised it as one of my questions. What if we hadn't known? But what if this person came to your meeting and then over tea and coffee, and then got friendly with people, and then confided in someone, an elder, or someone who felt vulnerable and triggered by what they were going to say, they confided in that individual. And then we know. And once you know, you can't unknow. And once you know when it's to do with safeguarding, you have to act. It is the law. It is Quaker policy. We cannot, as a religious organization or faith-based organization, whatever you want to describe us as, we cannot ignore the reputational damage of ignoring safeguarding issues. So once you know, you can't unknow. And is it fair to ask someone to be in a community? I mean, is it welcoming to say, yeah, you can come in as long as you don't talk about it? Isn't that what the Navy used to do about gay people? Yeah, say nothing, you're all right. Yeah, it's not Quakerly, is it, to do that? So it's a dilemma. Yeah, David.
Well, I right from the start, I'm touched and moved to see just how much care and thoughtfulness and attention and consideration is going into this. And I'm thinking of the broader context. I studied with a German teacher for 3 years who deals with Holocaust stress, trauma, and
with what trauma?
Holocaust trauma. And there's kind of, on the one side of it, people who have trauma learn to live with it and learn to package it and not to, it can be held, it can be contained. It's always there. And then there are people who do have skills for actually healing and releasing it. I said, no, often I would find myself in a position where I've got, a book that's a reference, and the nearest book to, is I'm sitting with this book by Thomas Hubel called Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World. And the point is, you're talking about one person, and we have a planet riddled with trauma. I mean, to the extent the suppressed trauma is no longer capable of being suppressed, and it's ripping our culture apart with wars that are spreading and escalating because the suppressed trauma can no longer be suppressed. And we're talking here about a very careful handling of a single situation in the middle of I had the image of looking after something very, very carefully, kind of helping tend this brick, and then looking back and seeing that it's in a crumbling wall in a building that's about to be smashed down. And I don't have the answer at all. But
that applies to so many things, David. I mean, the dilemmas that you're raising there are the same dilemmas that people involved in climate work are involved with, in social justice work are involved. Where do you need to feel you're doing something, and when it's put directly in front of you, can you say, no, I'm not going to help that person lying in the road because there are bigger issues in the world to solve it? How arrogant is that, to think that you're the person to solve the bigger issues rather than help the person that's sitting in front of you? So, but it's hard. Yeah. I get that. Absolutely get that. I spent the last probably 10 years of my life struggling with that. What is my role in this world of whether it's homelessness or social justice or climate change? And I don't have a personal answer, so I'm not going to try and give one for anyone else.
I'm saying, at one end, I'm completely touched by the care and attention and thoughtfulness here, and at the other end, and it's great, and at the other end, I'm ripped apart looking at what the world situation is, and I think that's true for a lot of people. And it comes back down to, what can I do in the moment?
Go for it, Manda.
So Angela did want to talk. Angela, do you want to speak?
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to say anything useful. I used to be a magistrate, so the way I see the law and so on might be relevant. I live near the Gloucester Road where there's a cafe called the Key Cafe, and it is run by former prisoners from Hallfield Prison. They do a nice lunch. I go to lunch there whenever I have family members who want to have a nice lunch. So what I think I'm saying is there are sometimes practical things. I was a head teacher in Gayhurst infants, an infant and nursery school, very complicated in Hackney. And what I had to do on Monday morning was make sure that the school was run properly. I would organise my bit, and then it was up to my teachers and the non-teaching staff to make sure everything worked. So I'm not saying anything at all helpful, I don't think, except we can't solve all of the problems of the world ourselves. But on Monday morning, what are we going to do?
All right for me to come in? There was a big thing about safeguarding and then some practical things. So I was going to echo what Patsy had said, that the reason we have safeguarding is that we are open to the public as a meeting for worship, so anyone can come in. That's why we've got procedures and why we're particularly careful with vulnerable people and children, that we've got measures in place during that time when we're all together, that they should be safe. And then the practical things that just come into my head is whether does the support group, can they ever have a small meeting for worship with that person? Perhaps they'd have to go to, I don't know, whether they could book a meeting room at one of our meeting houses or somewhere else rather than just sitting in a cafe and having coffee. Is being able to worship online a possibility? But I'm sure even if that was confidential, people might start to wonder why this person was always online. Were they ever going to meet them? That might cause issues, but that is one way to join in. And then in terms of, even though we haven't got formal structures, if we haven't got anything written in place, even informally, might it help to see if there's some sort of support agreement so that we can be as clear as possible with the person and anyone else in future to say, at the moment we're offering this, we're trying our best to, 5 or 6 of us to meet with you fortnightly, to be social contact. Maybe being honest about the fact that in future that might not be possible, or usually if people have probation and support after care, there's usually a tapering off, isn't there? So you could actually say, for the first year we'll try to meet with you at least fortnightly. Then perhaps it could only be monthly, which it isn't ideal, but it's sort of being very clear with someone rather than them kind of getting very reliant on that group, and then it being more difficult if that group is no longer able to support them.
Okay, I'm going to take your last one first, Manda. Yes, we do have
just some thoughts.
We have protocols set up, and we have a very clear agreement, documented, lodged with our safeguarding team, approved by them, co-written with them and with the individual concerned. We've signed it. It's all very official, and it sets out those boundaries. The safeguarding, the support group are aware of and have their own version of this. This is what you're meant to do too, side. So there's proper agreement in place, which we needed to have in place in order to find a way that we have successfully started doing, to have meetings for worship in a proper place with a Quaker faith and practice on the table, in a way and a place and at a time that it doesn't interfere with any other groups that are happening and cause any concerns. I'm not going to say how we do that because that's a bit bit too much information for people to know, but it does happen, and it's not meeting in a public place to attempt to meeting for worship in a little corner of a public room. It's a proper worshipful space. I can't remember what your first point was, but I thought I should not those last two. We got that under control. Thank you. What was your
Yeah,
first?
sorry, I'm not sure that you mentioned that at the beginning, but that had
No, I
been
didn't. No.
going through. So that's I think that's yeah, that's very positive that all of that is in place. No, it was more just a comment around we are meetings open to the public. Anyone can walk in and worship with us.
Yeah.
That's why we have those procedures. Obviously, then it's different if someone does disclose something, how we deal with that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know if others remember that. I mean, Marianne talked about the way things have progressed over time, but I remember when DVS and CRB checks first came in, and there was this. It's a bit like there was a lot of Quaker stuff with Quakers. We don't need to do this. Why do you want to? It's a bit like swearing on the Bible stuff. There was a lot of and obviously we do because we are a great mix of people. But it always felt to me that, and I've had CRB and DVS checks because of my work with homeless for like forever. I've got a rolling thing. There always seems to be a situation in which I'm allowed to continue it. So if I've done anything wrong in the past 20 years, it'll probably, you know, you'll suddenly see me disappearing from the screens. It'll turn up. Uh, but it's just a bit of paper. All these checks, these DVS checks, they're just a way of formally saying no one's found out about you yet. And proper safeguarding doesn't rely on stuff like that. Proper safeguarding relies on us looking out for each other, wondering why that relationship between those two people over there is developing, and why they don't seem to be talking to us so much anymore, because they're in that relationship, which seems a bit odd. What's going on? Is someone being groomed in a way? That kind of alertness to what's happening to those that we meet and worship with is intrusive in a way, but necessarily intrusive. I've grown up not finding out until I was an adult that friends of my parents had a very abusive relationship. We used to go round as kids to their family house and stay overnight, and I found out a long time later that Mrs. whatever her name was so relieved when her husband died, because now she wasn't going to get beaten up twice a week. That these kinds of knowing what's going on in people's lives, that's what safeguarding's about. It's knowing each other. We need to have a gentle curiosity without being nosy parkers, and it's difficult, really difficult. So I don't want you knowing about my business. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we're we're so focused on all these checks and bits of paper that actually there are very probably people who have sexually offended sitting in our meetings with us. We don't know who they are. It's probably just as well that we don't. But as far as dodgy behaviour goes, the people that I've come across, as Richard was saying, none of them were ever remotely likely to be caught by anybody for doing anything, but their behaviour was quite damaging and distressing. But they weren't caught by the net at all. So, I think I will a kind of a sort of what I'm just a bit cautious about how far all the checks actually really take us. They catch people like my 86-year-old friend, and they catch him forever. But there are other people who've done, similar or worse, who aren't caught. So I think, and you can't always sort of take people to task. You can sometimes. I remember sort of somebody at camp whose behaviour was, I think, shall we say, out of line with um, with what you would want. He looked like he was either grooming young people by inviting them for story times in a way that we didn't think was very good, or he was taking photos of children on their own, and we kind of got together and I think we kind of confronted him and said, you mustn't do this. And we thought we'd done it. And then I got to the camp reunion in the days when we actually had printed photos and everybody put their photos out. And in his collection of photos, there was a photograph of an 8-year-old naked boy on his own. And I kind of thought, oh, I had a kind of thump in my stomach. I thought, oh God, we missed that one. But anyway, it's just to say, perhaps to kind of back up what Richard was saying, we have to kind of look around us, really. But it also kind of evens it up that just because somebody's got an official blot on their copybook doesn't mean to say that we have to reject them forever. There should be some way or more ways of being properly rehabilitated.
Yeah, I've been looking in vain through any reports of the Epstein scandal for someone to say, yes, of course I stayed friends with this chap after knowing of his convictions, because I wanted to keep him on the straight and narrow, and I wanted him not to feel spurned. I wanted to build up the goodness in him, and challenge him on his bad behavior. But no one's ever done that. So that means they're complicit. The other thing is our ability to deny what's happening. I made myself incredibly unpopular as a trustee of the night shelter when a guest, one of the homeless people, reported that one of our overnight volunteers had been abusive. There were actually two counts of that. One was a physical abuse, and the other one was a bit of sexual nonsense, and it was sexual nonsense. But and on both cases, I was, oh no, that can't be happening. That wouldn't happen. And I had to spend hours looking through CCTV to show them the evidence that was there, and insist that in the one case someone got some training in dealing with challenging behavior, and in the other case we had to ask this volunteer of 20 years standing not to come back, because although it was foolish and provoked, it wasn't on. You couldn't have that. It was unacceptable. But the denial amongst everyone else, I felt I felt really uncomfortable, because I was speaking out when people wanted me not to, but they just don't want to believe it. And it's difficult. So we've moved on quite a long way from supporting former prisoners here, but
may I make a observation, I suppose, is in the future there is a fear by a large member of our population that the coming of AI will be a phenomenal thing where will we all be watched in all times? Shades of 1984 and Raslot, but I don't know.
Well, you can't see whether I'm wearing any trousers at the moment. You don't know what's going on. So I'm not worried about that.
Thank you, Richard.
Ray?
Hattie.
Yeah. David, could you put the name of the book on the chat, please? Has he gone?
I was muted. Yes, I will, Hattie.
Attuned.
Attuned by Thomas Hubel, Hubl, and the U is one of those with two dots on the top, an umlaut or something. I'll put it in the chat as well. And the point is, he works with dealing with Holocaust trauma, and it's huge what he's doing. I went to an event at the Free University of Berlin where they had 3 generations of people, Jewish and German. And at one point he set an exercise for them. And he said, I want you to pick a partner and find somebody, and you're going to talk for 15 minutes each about growing up in an atmosphere of guilt. Any questions? Nobody, German or Jew, 3 generations, had any question, any doubt that they grew up in an atmosphere of guilt. So people are growing up in a deeply traumatized world. And so what you are touching on, Richard, is, it's crucial for how we get to a world where we are not violent with each other, and we're not suppressing wounds from the past that prevent us from being able to act effectively in society. And we've got to get beyond just accepting or suppressing the knowledge of it, and opening it up and finding ways to genuinely heal. So yeah, sorry, Chet. I will put it in the chat, Hattie. Yeah.
Well, my friends, any more questions or comments? Then I think we've come to a natural break. May I, before you all dash off, tell you what's coming up next week? So you all can come, hopefully. It is Caroline Warminsley. Have I got that right, Hattie? Patsy?
Wormsley, she's trying to say.
Wormsley. That's a lady. And she is speaking on why I am a Quaker. Do come along. Thank you, friends. And have a good day.
Thank you.
Great. I've just managed to get that in the chat, and I'll leave it there for a moment. And I'll put it in the description for the video if we agree that the video is going to be published.
I don't think I've said anything, or anything has been said that would identify the individual in a way that would worry me, David. So yes, I'm okay for that.
I will publish it as unlisted anyway, and let you have the links so that you've got the chance for second thoughts. And then
I'm not going to watch over this again. It's fine with me.
Thank you.
Are people sufficiently okay with what I said and didn't say about the individual that I was talking about?
Yes, I haven't got a clue who they are.
Okay, good.
Jolly good.
They might. I don't.
Thank you, everybody. Do we have a meeting next week, or is this the end of it, Patsy? Ray?
Well, he just introduced next week's speaker.
Patsy, you're muted.
Richard did speak, but you probably were concentrating elsewhere.
All right. Sorry. Yes,
It's Caroline Walmsley. Why am I a Quaker?
Oh, great. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was putting that in the chat, so not listening.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Very
Thank you for
interesting.
everything there.